J.J. Watt announcing his retirement from the NFL after the end of the regular season. Is his peak the greatest peak we've seen all time from a defensive lineman? Fantastic career there. Tua concussions. Carson Wentz now going to start down the stretch for the Washington Commanders that need to win to get into the playoffs. All that and more coming up on today's mailbag episode of Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson, as always, at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. That is where most of the questions will come from on today's mailbag episode of P&W. Today's episode brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? Then this is the game for you. To download this game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in the game. That is Ultimate Football GM. Put your GM hat on, folks. So Matt and I are going to be asked to put our GM hats on in today's mailbag episode of Peacock and Williamson. We've got to start with the retirement of J.J. Watt. And the question from Jared here, is this, did he have the greatest peak? Because maybe even for some young NFL fans, it's been a little while now with those 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards, which is, I mean, that's something, right? Getting one Defensive Player of the Year award is
massive,
big time for an NFL player. He got 3 of them. His stretch of seasons early in his career were absurd. And Jared's question is, was it the best peak we've ever seen? Because it's kind of nice for a player like J.J. Watt, and seeing how he's been so injured and had some really massive injuries, and how the end of his career, he's a good, not great player now, just how amazing he was for a stretch in the NFL and how impactful he was.
Yeah. I don't know if his peak is number 1, but it's certainly in the conversation. And I'm going to kind of alter the question a little bit in that, where is he on the pantheon of greatest defensive players that have ever played the game? To me, I think Lawrence Taylor's number 1, but it's not a huge gap. It's not Jerry Rice, and then I'm not sure who the second receiver is, or I always like the Justin Tucker, and then I don't know who the next kicker is conversation.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway,
lapping the field, some players were there's some defensive players, and Lawrence Taylor's scary, and the blindside hits. If you just go look at his blindside hit highlight reel, like that's got to affect you as a quarterback, knowing that guy's out there. At least with J.J. Watt and Aaron Donald, you kind of see him coming a little bit.
A little bit better, yeah. And what Taylor did was new too. Like we usually block those guys with tight ends and running backs. Well, good freaking luck with that, And then you have 3 guys on him, and he changes the game. I didn't plan on talking about a lot of Lawrence Taylor, but not long ago, I'm a dork. I went to YouTube and I looked up Lawrence Taylor run defense. It's awesome. He's chasing running backs from the backside, hacking the ball out. So he's my number 1. I do think there is a tier, though, of the elites, that probably 8, 10 defensive players ever. JJ absolutely is on it. Aaron Donald would be the only other contemporary that I would put on that list. We're talking Reggie White, those type of dudes that are transcendent, no-brainer, Hall of Famer, first ballot guys. And I have 2 numbers that might startle people about Watt. And first one is from Pro Football Focus. And I don't love pressures as a stat because I think they're a little subjective. If I ever write an article, I never cite pressures because I kind of think it depends on what mood the guy's in that day that's picking them.
Tackles are the same. Just real quick, tackles are the same way.
Tackles, I never cite them.
And defensive stats are tough. Like unless you actually intercepted the ball or completed the sack, it's really hard with defensive stats, and that's why you have to kind of lean on your eyes, and you have to take all of these stats together and realize that the numbers could be different, a little bit fluffed. Whether it's QB hits or pressures, or PFF grades. You want to match what the stat says, match it with what you're seeing with your eyes. And with someone like J.J. Watt, those things did match.
Yes. So I guess Pro Football Focus has been recording pressures, which again I don't love the stat, since 2006. So this doesn't include White and Taylor and some of those guys, but still gives you an idea that since 2006, only 3 instances has someone had 100 or more pressures in a season. Max Crosby last year had 100. 2018, Aaron Donald had 106. JJ Watt had 119 in 2014. Like that's crazy. Like not only is it number one, but it's number one by a big, big margin. If 100's an unbelievable barometer and he's at 119, wow. I mean, 21 sacks, 44 hits, 54 hurries. I'm more of a believer in tackles for loss because, hey, if you tackle a guy behind the line of scrimmage, it's a tackle for loss. So this one's a little more mind-boggling to me. So the record for tackles for loss in a season is 39 in 2012 by JJ Watt. 39 tackles for loss. Second place is 29 in the season. Also by JJ Watt in 2014 and 2015. So he not only has the best season by like 33% more than anybody else, he also has second and third place. I mean, like that was his dominance. The 2012 to 2015 era, he was the best player in the game.
And for those folks that don't remember it well, just think about what the peak has been for Aaron Donald. And I think that's the best conversation because it's easier to, both kind of interior guys, although and Aaron Donald.
JJ Watt played outside quite a bit.
Yeah, JJ Watt was more of that five technique, and he would get outside the tackle sometimes, but a lot of work inside as well on passing downs. But like kind of quote unquote interior guys, and that's a really tough conversation. Which peak do you take, Aaron Donald or JJ Watt? And so if you weren't sure how good JJ Watt was, Aaron Donald's the best defensive player in the league. That's what JJ Watt was.
And they both could win defensive MVP every year, and it gets boring. It's like Michael Jordan win MVPs or Wayne Gretzky wins scoring titles or whatever. That's the favorite over the whole field. Last note too is the JJ SWAT stuff, batting passes down, was revolutionary too. He's so good at it. It wasn't just luck.
You think about a guy who's getting 20 sacks and defending that many passes at the same time. He's affecting the passing game more than any player, maybe ever. So that's the argument for peak Watt, I think, right there.
Absolutely. So he is in the Mount Rushmore of defensive players.
Carson Wentz, Matt, do you think Carson? Oh, by the way, so the JJ Watt's final home game coming up in week 17. I just saw this, which is just a pretty cool story about life coming together and his career ending. His son is going to see his dad play for the first time in his last home game coming up here in week 17. JJ Watt.
Yeah, newborn. I guess there's pictures. I think that's how he announced his retirement and all that. And I don't know this for a fact, but I'm sure that influences his decision. Is we just had our first kid. We're gonna.
Your body, like how much more can your body take? Because he's gone through a lot injury wise since that peak. And but fantastic career. So.
I also don't think coming back to Arizona next year is very attractive.
That's let's see if he unretires in the offseason and has an ability to ring chase for a different franchise. Maybe if that changes his mind, but
maybe the Steelers with his brothers.
One more season with the Steelers, that would be pretty cool.
You don't need the money, JJ. We'll give you $1 million. Come play with TJ and Derek for a year. It'll be fun. You and Cam Hayward will be buddies.
Where's the Watt family from originally?
Wisconsin area.
Wisconsin.
Yeah. Up north.
So he's not worried about the cold weather.
No, he can hack it.
Okay. Next, we got to talk about Carson Wentz is going to be the quarterback down the stretch for the Washington Commanders, trying to play their way into the playoffs. I feel like we saw this in Indianapolis last year. And Tua, should Tua shut it down with the concussions this year? Matt, you have an interesting stat about Tua and what his play was like post-concussion last week, and a scary situation in the NFL when it comes to head injuries. Tons of other questions as well on this mailbag episode of Peacock and Williamson. Ultimate Football GM is our new partner and sponsor for today's episode, the mobile game Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise, well, your dream can come true in this game. And this game is definitely for you. Ultimate Football GM. Manage every strategic aspect of your team. Play through the season and lead your team to glory. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency, the entire off-season draft, ups and downs of a season, and all this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM, completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. I've in my second season trying to turn around a franchise on Ultimate Football GM. I think I've got my quarterback in place. I just need to put the pieces around him, trying to build the team as I preach teams should be building their NFL franchises here on the podcast. And you can too. And Peacock and Williamson listeners can get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in the game store. That's promo code Locked On, one word, all caps. So make sure you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Thanks again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every single day. Make sure you check out Locked On Sports today, the biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's take of the day. Locked On Sports today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you are a listener of Peacock and Williamson, you probably had a bonus episode over the holiday, a year-end special that was hosted by Locked On Sports today's Peter Bukowski. So I hope you enjoyed that. And if you did, go check out Locked On Sports today, every day, for all the sporting news around the world. Lo and behold, the news is Carson Wentz is going to start for the Washington Commanders as they try to get into the playoffs the last 2 weeks of the season. The Indianapolis Colts did this exact same thing last year, and they did not get in. Is Ron Rivera and the Washington Commanders, Matt, doomed to repeat the mistakes made from the Indianapolis Colts last year?
It's a good point about the Niners. Like, you just had the toughest test that you can have in this league. Let's not judge them by the outlier teams.
Yeah, and you had already gone through the process of deciding, hey, Taylor Heineke's our guy. He's got the locker room, and maybe he made some turnovers, but Carson Wentz turns the ball over too. So you're not even helping yourself there either. So I don't really know what the point is of this. I think you're just kind of maybe there's no right decision, so it doesn't matter. But I don't know. It doesn't feel like the right way to go out here for the Commanders with Carson Wentz if they do indeed go out. But maybe it is the right decision. I don't know.
I mean, post-Christmas quarterback changes not due to injury for potential playoff teams is not a good formula. I mean, I think that's pretty safe to say. Like, well, what do I want for Christmas? I'm going to put the backup quarterback in, I understand it, though. I like your Niner point because, hey, that's the hardest test you're going to get. I think, though, you've probably, if you're the coaching staff at Washington, you probably said Heineke's a really good backup. He does have the locker room, easy to root for. I want him on my team. He can win games for me for a month or 6 weeks. But deep down, when I really evaluate this player, he's not good enough to get me where I need to go. Is Wentz? Probably not. But there's still more hope. Wentz was the second pick in the draft. He's a bigger, stronger, better thrower. Is this the time to make the change? I don't know. I mean, is your goal just to get in the playoffs? Probably Heineke would give you the better chance over the last 2 games. Is your goal to win playoff games and evaluate Wentz further for the future? I think then Wentz makes sense. So neither is the answer, I think. I mean, I think you said that well. Maybe the answer is neither. That's probably true. If you were out of it, would it be how right now? Just to see what the kid can do.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand it. I was a big Wentz supporter, and frankly, I was wrong about him. But I also think he's gotten a little bit of the short end of the stick the last couple. He's been a little bit of the whipping boy, the guy that's easy to blame. And I guess he's not the most likable fella either, or best teammate either.
Yeah, that's a tough combination there.
Yeah,
so we'll see how that ends for the Washington Commanders, and we'll have all those games previewed for Week 17 coming up on the show starting tomorrow. We got to talk about Tua here.
Yeah, we
this do. It's an unfortunate situation for him, and I didn't even realize how stark it was. And of course, we learned more about the concussion, the most recent concussion for Tua, and obviously he missed some games earlier in the year because of a concussion. Now has another one that he reported symptoms Monday after the game, and we had a question from A. Hendricks on Twitter about Tua, and he says it's time to put your GM hat on, guys. You're running the Miami Dolphins. What are you doing with Tua. And then there's some questions about into the future as well next year if Tua is going to be your guy. But one of my questions here with this, Matt, is do you shut Tua down? Should Tua shut himself down? Or do you think this concussion thing is this bad?
I think it's really worrisome. So you mentioned I did have a stat. Warren Sharp put out a tweet, and all I did was retweet it. But he also has the clip where he strongly suspects Tua was concussed. And it's about there's 2 minutes and 40 seconds left in the first half. And he dumps one off to Gesicki and gets tackled by the legs, the lower body, twists, his back hits the ground, and then his head snaps right off the turf. And it sure looks like that's as good a spot as any to say that's where it occurred. Which, of course, especially around this team, and I don't really want to go down this road, brings up the question, why aren't the doctors, why aren't the neurologists on this more, and why did he finish the game? But everybody killed him, myself included, on Monday. I didn't know anything about a concussion. I'm just like, Tua fell apart in that game.
Right.
Well, if Warren's right about where the concussion took place, pre-concussion, he was 9 of 12 for 229 yards, 19.1 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. After this play, whether that's a concussion or not, he's 9 of 13 for 81 yards, 6.2 yards per attempt, no touchdowns, and 3 really bad interceptions, and cost his team the game. Like, I can't blame the guy and say, boy, you stink if he's playing out there concussed, obviously. But I'm going to sound coarse here. I really worried about Tua's durability coming out of Alabama, and that was before concussions. I mean, he had the hip, he had all sorts of issues. He's not the biggest guy. He takes hits. He stays in harm's way, often to his credit, to deliver the football. He's not super mobile to get out of the way, but he kind of plays like a mobile quarterback. So he takes punishment. And another concussion on top of things really has me concerned. And to put the GM hat on, I think more than most teams, you're going to have to spend some decent money on a number 2, whether that's Bridgewater, Brissett, Wentz, Heineke, those type of guys. I don't think you can ignore it with the Dolphins. And lastly, that begs the other question. Again, we're just talking business here. I hope the young man is fine. Can I extend him? That I don't know, because he's also not a Herbert Burrow level talent.
And you can't leave it up to NFL players to monitor it themselves.
No.
He's going to play through it. So It's up to you to shut him down if you think he's in harm's way. And it's, what we know, what little we know. I'm not a doctor, but what we've learned and what I've been told is that, the more you have concussions, the easier it is to get your next concussion, especially in the short term. And maybe we've seen that. Maybe he wouldn't have been concussed this time if he wasn't already concussed earlier in the season. And so do you take him out of, you're trying to get into the playoffs and win some games, clear your best quarterback, and that's a tough situation. Do you try to take him out? And if you're taking him out because of concussions, then are you worried long term? Are you trying to draft and develop a guy behind him? Do you go veteran in the off season?
It's better have a solid number 2 and some kind of plan.
It's a really tough situation. And then there's the argument that's like, well, all these guys are playing hurt and a lot of guys are concussed. And I always want to call him Cody Pickett. Didn't Kenny Pickett have a couple concussions already too this year?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. And
I mean, that worries me too. Yeah, right.
Yeah, but is that just a thing? And a lot of these guys have it. So it's not just Tua himself. But clearly that last game we were talking about, it's like, well, you scored 20 points in the first half and 0 points in the second half. That was, what happened there? We just completely collapsed. And you might have a clue as to why now. And if at this point, seeing what the Dolphins already went through earlier this season, I think you almost have to sit him down at least one game. And maybe you do have to shelve him for the season.
Maybe. I always hate talking medical because I know I don't know. I mean, someone's getting paid much more than I am to analyze this, but I'm sure there'll be more, questions about the Dolphin organization and their handling of this as well as their independent neurologist or whomever. It's not a great look, and it always seems to be around this team and this player, unfortunately. And they're in a bind. I mean, they've lost 4 in a row. They're far from a sure thing to go to the playoffs, no matter who their quarterback is. And how about this crazy stat? There's been, I think 63 was the number. It's right around there, somewhere between 60 and 70 teams that have gone winless in December. Of those teams, none have made the playoffs. If you don't win a game in December, no team has ever gone to the playoffs. Jets and Dolphins both went winless in December. How about
Wow.
that little nugget?
You got some good nuggets today, Matt. That's fantastic. I like that one a lot.
Yeah.
And I wonder if on the other side of things, what teams' records are in the playoffs if they swept December.
Yeah, right. Is
You know,
getting
you know,
hot at the end of the year a real
right.
thing? I bet it is.
Speaking of that, how about those Chargers? We got a question about the Chargers. If they might be that sneaky team this year in the playoffs that's getting hot at just the right time, and more coming up to finish up today's Peacock and Williamson mailbag. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure you're going to love. That's why you'll be able to find an episode from The League available as a bonus episode on Locked On NFL, which happens to be the home of Peacock and Williamson as well. So make sure you're subscribed up to the Locked On NFL channel on Twitter. On YouTube. Narrated by Super Bowl champion and legendary smack talker Richard Sherman and sports broadcaster and rising star Taylor Rooks. The League is an 8-part docuseries about the most bizarre, inspirational, and unlikely stories connected to America's favorite sport, pro football. You won't want to miss these untold stories spanning from the 1940s through the present time. Each story offers equal parts history, entertainment, and social commentary. So head over to Locked On NFL for a bonus episode of The League, or catch the full series wherever you get your podcasts. Available now. Audible, get in the game. Let's go to Zachary, who has a question here about his Los Angeles Chargers. He says, with Joey Bosa and Rashawn Slater coming back, along with getting healthy and on a 3-game winning streak, as well as the talent that we have on both, the talent we have on this team on both sides of the ball, who says LA can't win it all this season? Well, there was an LA that won it last year, so maybe it just stays. Maybe the trophy just stays in Los Angeles this year. What do you think about those Chargers right now? The way Zach lays it out here, the Chargers are one of those teams that are probably in a pretty good spot coming into the playoffs that have, leapfrog teams like the Miami Dolphins that were hotter earlier in the season.
Yeah, I definitely see that. I mean, I really think Buffalo, Kansas City, and Cincinnati are their own tier in the AFC. You know, they're the top 3 teams, and we can talk about who's 4 or what order those top 3 are in. That doesn't really matter for the Chargers, but I do think, the order of the top 3, I mean. But I probably would vote the Chargers as the 4th best team in the conference. Unfortunately, that means a wild card, approach. You're not going to be at home, and not they have a great home field advantage anyway. But I really like how they're playing. The Bosa Slater thing is very important to me. Slater's a great left tackle. They need somebody other than Khalil Mack. I just looked while we were at break there. Both of those guys were hurt early October, and it sounds like the original prognostication was right around this time they'll be back. You keep hearing the rumors, especially Bosa, but you can't really verify them. But I would think they're there for the playoffs. The Chargers already clinched a spot. They're going to be a wild card team. So maybe you don't rush them back in the regular season. There's a couple things that worry me about them is they're not real explosive on offense. I mean, deep passing game. And they really have very little running game whatsoever. So if they have to go to Cincy or Buffalo or Kansas City and weather's a problem, their run defense and run offense gives me some pause. But yes, I could write a story where they get hot and Herbert's a stud and they win the whole thing.
No matter how it ends, I think they're going to take a look at the offensive coordinator over there because too much talent. And I know they were banged up a lot, but you got a guy like Justin Herbert, and there should be a lot more fireworks on that offense.
Yes.
And with the resources they put in the offensive line, too, running the ball.
Mm-hmm. They've got a lot of O-line injuries, but still, they need. I mean, they don't have a lot of excuses other than injuries.
I would put them though. You're right. So of the group of teams, I think there's 5 teams that I'm putting money on to win a Super Bowl this year. I think right now the hottest teams in the NFC are the Eagles and the 49ers. The Cowboys are I would put right behind those 2 teams. And then there's obviously the Kansas City Chiefs. I'd still put the Bills up there and the Bengals now. And so I'd have like sort of the Chargers in the AFC and the Cowboys in the NFC, which is like they're right there of the team. Like, would not surprise me if they were both in the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Still have some questions.
Yeah, I would put both those teams as not in tier 1 in their conference, but better than the rest. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Pretty clearly.
Right. They should beat up on the rest of the wild card teams.
Yes. Side note, I was just on Football Outsiders site, and their DVOA came out for the week, and their big headline is there's 7 teams and everybody else. I'm like, 7? I could see 6. I can't see 7. They have the Ravens lumped in with those teams. I don't see that at all. I mean, their defense is phenomenal. Their passing game is brutal, though.
Yeah, I guess healthy 100%
Lamar.
Lamar. I
Right.
could buy that being more of the case, but it's tough because we haven't seen that in a
I
bit.
know. Yeah, I don't see them.
And is he going to be 100% in the playoffs?
Right. I mean, if he's playing this week.
Let's finish this up with JDS. JDS actually has 2 good questions. One, and it's kind of actually, there's a couple of questions that tie in here. Let's see if we can do this quickly. Shantanu says, is there a history never repeats but rhymes vibe to this season? Mostly talking about the emergence of running game as an equalizer for poor teams and a game changer for good teams in the playoffs. What happens to teams that won't run the ball like Buffalo?
See, I don't think Buffalo won't run the ball. I mean, if you look at their attempts and yardage, it isn't bad. It's just a little untraditional because it's a lot of Allen, it's Singletary, it's Cook. I mean, it's not a Saquon Barkley, bell cow type guy. I mean, the Chargers worry me more. The Chiefs are running the ball a fair amount. This year's changed a little bit. I mean, they're not just pass in Kansas City and Buffalo. But I understand his point. Running games travel, good offensive lines travel. There's going to be weather. There's times you're going to have to lean on it. And I absolutely think the running games this year are much more important than they've been the last 5 or 10, without question. And I'm really looking forward to Football Outsiders, Pro Football Focus, really doing studies and analytics studies of the value of the running game in 2022. I mean, I keep going back to the Falcons, the Giants, teams like that really aren't that talented, that have hung around all year only because of their running game mostly. So, I mean, even like Chicago's been competitive and they have no good players, let alone the Ravens and teams like that, Tennessee, right. So I do think the running game is more important and is in a transitional stage with how we view it. And if you can't run the ball in the playoffs, I absolutely think that could be a deal breaker, no doubt.
I think both the Chiefs and the Bills kind of look back at last season and were like, well, we don't want to have to go in this 45-43 game in the playoffs, right, against another team. And we want to be able to run the ball, keep the ball away. So to me, it's all about the quarterbacks still, but how the running game impacts those quarterbacks. If you don't have a great quarterback, you better have a good running game and a good defense in the playoffs. And if the team you're playing against has a great quarterback, it's nice to run the ball to keep that quarterback on the sideline and not on the field. So that's where it all matters to me. But if you're a team that does have one of the great quarterbacks, like if you are Buffalo or Kansas City, I don't think it's that big of a deal because I think you're still ahead of the game and you could throw your way to a lot of wins. And we've seen that before as well. But it is nice to be able to have that balance and be able to run the ball when you need it in the playoffs in cold weather, clearly.
I just want to check real quick on run pass ratio. Kansas City's throwing the ball the 6th most in the league, 6. Buffalo's at 15. They're right in the middle. But the teams that aren't running the ball hardly at all, Tampa, the Chargers, who we talked about, Minnesota, Arizona, Miami, they're the top 5 with highest pass percentage. I think that's destroyed Tampa Bay. We already mentioned the Chargers. That worries me. It really worries me about Miami. I mean, they've had one good running game that I can remember. That was the Buffalo game.
And some of those teams that are throwing the ball a lot aren't throwing the ball far. It's like,
right.
Like just dink and dunk. Passing
Chargers,
game is the running game. Tampa Bay, it's just brutal watching them on offense right now. So those teams are clearly missing a running game because the passing game is the running game, and they're not dropping back and able to throw the ball down the field either.
One last nugget. Everyone, Tom Brady is the fastest. Get it out of your hands. He's at like 2.3 seconds. That's the fastest in the league. This past week, he was at 1.88. That's like impossible. It's way too fast. Like people are like, why isn't Mike Evans getting going? Because he can't get open in 1.88 seconds, 30 yards downfield. I mean, like it's crazy.
All right. Thanks everybody for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. Back tomorrow. Starting to make picks for week 17. Talk to you then right here. Peacock and Williamson.